Mark had always dreamed of living somewhere far from the constant noise of the city. For years, he had been saving every penny he could, skipping vacations and fancy dinners. All for one goal: to buy a piece of land where he could have peace, privacy, and the kind of life where the loudest thing he'd hear was the sound of birds in the morning. After years of searching, he finally found a small, beautiful property on the edge of the countryside. It wasn't too far from town, but it was far enough that at night the stars looked like they had been scattered across the sky just for him. He fell in love with it instantly. It was a big yard, plenty of trees, and a porch where he could sit with a cup of coffee in the morning and just breathe. It felt like a place where nothing and no one could bother him. When he signed the papers and got the keys, he felt a sense of freedom he had never experienced before. No more shared walls like in his old apartment, no more neighbors complaining about his music, and no more traffic noise keeping him up at night. He told himself that here he would finally be able to relax. But life has a strange way of testing people, and Mark was about to find out that peace and quiet sometimes come with unexpected challenges. The first week was perfect. He unpacked his boxers slowly, enjoying the process instead of rushing. Every morning, he would wake up to the golden sunlight streaming through the curtains and the sound of leaves rustling in the wind. He would step out onto the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watch the sunrise, and smile to himself. It felt like this was exactly where he was meant to be. But then, on the 8th morning, he heard something strange. It started as a distant At first, he thought maybe it was a tractor from a nearby farm. But the sound grew louder and sharper, like a swarm of angry bees getting closer and closer. Before he could even figure out what it was, a loud, roaring ATV burst into view, cutting right across the edge of his yard. Dust and dirt flew into the air, and the sound was so loud that it rattled the peaceful morning silence like glass shattering on the floor. Mark blinked in surprise, wondering if maybe the rider was lost. The ATV didn't slow down, though. It zipped right across the back of his property, leaving tire tracks in the grass before disappearing into the trees on the other side. He stood there for a moment, his coffee cooling in his hand, trying to make sense of what he had just seen. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. Maybe the person didn't realize it was private property. The next day, it happened again. Next, and the next. Every single morning, right around the same time, the ATV came tearing through his land. Sometimes the rider waved, though it wasn't a friendly wave, more of a smug "I'm coming through whether you like it or not" kind of wave. As the dust it kicked up would drift toward his porch, coating the railing and sometimes even getting into his coffee. The noise was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just loud, it was aggressive. Like the rider wanted to make sure everyone knew they were there. Mark soon learned who the rider was. The locals called her Karen, a woman in her late 40s, who lived in the nearby HOA-controlled neighborhood. He had heard bits and pieces about her from the guy at the general store in town. She was known for getting into other people's business, complaining about everything, and somehow thinking she had authority everywhere, even outside the HOA boundaries. Apparently, she liked to ride her ATV every morning as part of her routine. And unfortunately for Mark, the route she had chosen cut directly through his backyard. At first, Mark didn't want to make a fuss. He figured maybe if he ignored it, she would eventually find another path. After all, he had just moved in. He didn't want to be that neighbor who caused trouble right away. But as the days went by, it became harder to stay patient. Every time that engine roared to life in the distance, he would feel his jaw tighten. Every time she sped through, he would see new tire marks scarring his lawn he'd worked hard for. This property, and watching someone treat it like their personal racetrack, was like getting a paper cut in the same spot over and over again. It wasn't just the noise and the mess. It was the principle of it. This was his land. He had the deed to prove it. No one had the right to use it without his permission, especially not someone who acted like they owned the place. And yet Karen seemed to think it was her God-given right to drive across it every single day. One morning, it got even worse. Mark was sitting on the porch with his laptop, trying to get some work done while enjoying the fresh air. He had just taken a sip of coffee when the now familiar roar filled the air. Before he could move, The ATV came tearing around the side of the property, and this time, Karen took the turn a little too wide. The tires dug into the grass, sending a spray of dirt and small rocks flying directly toward him. A chunk of mud landed right on the keyboard of his laptop. He stood up, shocked and angry, but she didn't even slow down. She just sped past, her long blonde ponytail swinging behind her, and disappeared into the trees. Mark wiped the mud from his laptop and sat back down, but his hands were shaking. This wasn't just annoying anymore. This was disrespect. And the longer he let it go on, the more she would think it was okay. Still, he told himself to give it one more day before saying anything. Maybe she would realize she was crossing a line. Maybe. The next morning, he decided to watch for her. He stood at the edge of his porch with his arms crossed, waiting. Right on time, he heard the engine. She came speeding into view, sunglasses on, a smirk on her face. She didn't even glance his way, just tore through the property like she owned it. Mark's patience was wearing dangerously thin. The problem was, he knew people like her. Confronting them wasn't as simple as saying, "Please stop." People like Karen didn't respond to polite requests. They twisted words, played the victim, and found ways to make themselves seem like the ones being wronged. But he also knew he couldn't just let it slide forever. This was his land, his home, his safe place. And if he didn't protect it now, she would keep taking more and more until he had no peace left at all. That night, he sat on his porch, listening to the crickets and staring out into the dark. He thought about the property, about the money and effort it had taken to get here, about how much he loved the stillness, and about how easily that stillness could be destroyed by the wrong person. He realized something important in that moment. People like Karen only stopped when they were forced to, and if she thought she could get away with this forever, she was very, very wrong. Mark had reached his limit. The morning after he decided he needed to do something, he woke up earlier than usual. The sun had barely started to rise, the air was cool, and the sky was painted in soft pink and orange colors. He knew she would come soon, right on schedule like she always did. He stood by the side of his porch waiting, rehearsing in his mind what he would say. He wasn't the kind of man who liked confrontation, but this wasn't just about personality. This was about respect, and his patience had already been stretched thin. Soon enough, he heard it, the deep, buzzing roar of the ATV engine breaking through the morning silence. It started far away, then grew louder with every passing second. His stomach tightened, his jaw clenched. And then there she was, bursting out from between the trees, wearing her oversized sunglasses and that same confident smirk she always had. She didn't slow down, didn't even glance at him. She just aimed straight across his property like it was a public road. Mark stepped forward and waved his arms, signaling her to stop. At first, she seemed annoyed that anyone would dare get in her way. She slowed the ATV, but didn't turn off the engine. The sound rumbled in the air as she looked at him like he was an inconvenience. "Morning," Mark said, trying to keep his voice even. "Can we talk for a minute?" She tilted her head slightly, almost as if she was debating whether he was worth listening to. "I'm in a hurry," she replied flatly, her voice dripping with impatience. "This won't take long," Mark said. "I just wanted to let you know that this is private property. I'd appreciate it if you could take another route instead of cutting through here." Her eyebrows shot up like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Excuse me? I've been riding through here for years," she said. The previous owner didn't mind. Mark kept his voice calm. "It may be true, but I'm the owner now, and I do mind. I'd prefer it if you stayed on the public trail." She gave a short, sharp laugh. "Well, you're new here, so maybe you don't understand how things work. The HOA allows access to the trail from this side." Mark almost laughed at the absurdity of that. "I'm not part of the HOA, and they don't control this land. This is my property. The trail entrance is a short drive around the neighborhood. You can use that." Her eyes narrowed. You're not making a very good impression as a neighbor." He bit back the frustration rising in his chest. "I'm just asking you to respect my land, that's all." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she revved the engine a little, making the noise even louder, almost like a small act of defiance. Then she finally said, "Fine. Whatever," before speeding off. Leaving a cloud of dust behind, Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Maybe that was it. Maybe she would take the other route now. But a part of him, deep down, knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The very next morning, he got his answer. He was sipping his coffee when he heard the familiar roar. He stepped outside just in time to see her. Not only was she still cutting through, but she was going even faster than before. The ATV kicked up twice as much dust, and this time, she didn't even pretend not to notice him. She glanced his way, smirked, and then deliberately veered closer to his porch before turning toward the trail. It was as if she wanted to send a message. "You can't tell me what to do." Mark set his coffee cup down, his hands trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. She had taken his polite request as a challenge, not a warning. The following days made it even more obvious. She started coming at different times, as if she was trying to keep him from blocking her again. Sometimes she'd ride through in the afternoon, sometimes late in the evening, and sometimes still in the early morning. But no matter what time she came, the ATV noise was impossible to ignore. The sound was harsh and intrusive, a constant reminder that she was breaking his trust and crossing his boundaries. One afternoon, while Mark was working on fixing up the flower bed in his front yard, a neighbor from down the road stopped by. His name was Carl, an older man with kind eyes and a calm voice. "I see Karen's been giving you trouble," Carl said. Mark sighed. "You could say that." Carl chuckled without humor. "She's been like that for years. Thinks rules are for other people. Previous owner here didn't care because he hardly ever stayed at the property. But you're here full-time. That's going to make her mad." "I'm already getting that impression," Mark said. Carl shook his head. "Word of advice, don't expect her to stop just because you asked nicely. If anything, she double down. She's the type who can't stand being told no." That advice proved to be true the very next weekend. Mark had a few friends over for a barbecue. They were sitting in the backyard, enjoying the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter. Out of nowhere, the ATV came roaring through. Karen didn't even slow down for the group. She zipped by so fast that one of his guests had to step back to avoid being sprayed with dirt. "What the hell was that?" one of his friends asked, coughing from the dust. "That," Mark said through clenched teeth, "is my neighbor who doesn't believe in property lines." It was humiliating. Here he was, proud of his new home, trying to make it a welcoming place for his friends, and this woman had turned it into her personal shortcut. The worst part was the way she looked at him when she passed, a look that said, "I dare you to stop me." The final straw came one morning when Mark was out back repairing part of the fence near the tree line. He had just finished hammering a board into place when he heard her approaching. He stood in her path and raised his hand to signal her to stop. She slammed the brakes and glared at him. "What now?" She snapped. "You've ignored my request," Mark said. "This is the last time I'm asking. Stay off my property." Lips twisted into a mocking smile. "Or what? You'll call the cops? Go ahead. I'll just tell them I've always used this trail. I'll look like the bad guy for making trouble." Mark's patience snapped. "This is my land. I've been more than polite, but you keep disrespecting me. You need to find another route today." She leaned back on her seat and crossed her arms. "You really don't understand how things work here, do you?" she said with a laugh. "You're new. Eventually, you'll learn it's easier to just get along with me." "Getting along doesn't mean letting you trespass," Mark shot back. Her smile vanished, replaced with a cold glare. "You're going to regret this," she said before revving her engine and speeding off. Mark stood there in the swirling dust, his heart pounding. Carl had been right. People like her didn't stop when you asked nicely. If anything, they saw kindness as weakness. And now she had made it personal. That evening, Mark sat at his kitchen table, staring at the property. Map he kept folded in a drawer. Every line, every corner of that land was legally his. No HOA, no neighbor, no matter how loud or arrogant, had the right to use it without his consent. If Karen wanted to test him, she was about to find out he could be just as stubborn as she was, maybe more, yet very dramatic. The tension between Mark and Karen had been building for days, like storm clouds gathering before a downpour. Every time she came roaring across his property, the sound felt louder, the dust thicker, and the disrespect sharper. could feel his patience wearing away little by little, and he knew it was only a matter of time before something happened that would push things over the edge. That something arrived one Saturday morning. The day had started off beautifully. Bright sun, warm breeze, and the kind of calm that made the countryside so special. Mark had invited two of his close friends, Daniel and Lisa, over for coffee. They were sitting out on the porch, mugs in hand, talking and laughing about old times. Mark felt relaxed for the first time in weeks. Then he heard it, that familiar low rumble in the distance. His smile faded, and his friends noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" Lisa asked. Mark shook his head, setting his coffee cup down. "You're about to meet my least favorite neighbor." The rumble grew louder until it turned into a roar. Then, like clockwork, Karen's ATV came bursting into view. She didn't slow down, didn't look at them, didn't care that there were people sitting just a few yards away. She cut straight across the property, sending up a cloud of dust that drifted toward the porch. Lisa covered her mouth, coughing. Daniel frowned. "She just drives through here. It's like this is a road every day," Mark said, his voice tight. "I've told her to stop. She refuses." Daniel stood up, clearly annoyed. "You want me to say something to her?" Mark shook his head. "No, this is my problem. I think it's time I deal with it, right now." The next time the ATV came around, just 20 minutes later, Mark was ready. He walked down to the yard and stood right in her path, his arms folded across his chest. She saw him, but didn't slow down until the very last moment, the tires kicking up dirt as she skidded to a stop just a few feet away. "Move," she said, her voice sharp and impatient. "No," Mark replied calmly. "We're going to talk." Let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, great. Another lecture." "This isn't a lecture," he said. "This is the last warning. You're trespassing. I've told you before to use the public trail entrance. You keep ignoring me. That stops today." Karen removed her sunglasses slowly, like she was about to say something dramatic. Her eyes were cold, but there was a smug glint in them. "Think you can tell me what to do? I've been using this path for years. Nobody's going to stop me, especially not you." Mark kept his voice even, though his blood was boiling. "Doesn't matter how long you've been doing it. This isn't your property. I don't care about your habits or your convenience. You're not allowed here." She tilted her head, pretending to think. "You know, you're making a lot of enemies in this neighborhood. People talk and word travels fast. You might want to think about how you treat your neighbors." "I treat my neighbors with respect," Mark said firmly. "But you're not acting like a neighbor. You're acting like someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them." Her voice rose a little. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't the city. Out here, people help each other. They don't build walls between them." "This isn't a wall," Mark replied. "It's a boundary. You're crossing it, literally." By now, the exchange had gotten loud enough that other people in the neighborhood were starting to notice. A couple of them came out onto their porches, watching from a distance. Mark could feel the eyes on him, but he didn't care. This needed to happen. Karen, however, seemed to thrive on the attention. She raised her voice even more, as if performing for an audience. "Look at this. The new guy thinks he can boss people around on land that's been part of our route for years? What kind of neighbor acts like this?" "That's enough," Mark said. "Leave my property. Now." She pointed at him accusingly. "You're making a huge mistake. I'll be talking to the HOA about you." Mark's patience finally snapped. "The HOA doesn't own this land. They don't have any authority here. If you come through here again, I'll be contacting the sheriff." That got a reaction from her. Her face turned red, and for a moment she just sat there, gripping the ATV handlebars tightly. Then she leaned forward, her voice sharp and full of venom. "You think you can threaten me? I'll make your life miserable." Before Mark could respond, she revved the engine so loudly that it made his ears ring. Then she swerved around him and sped off, leaving another thick cloud of dust behind. When he turned back toward the porch, he saw Daniel and Lisa standing there, both looking shocked. "Wow," Daniel said. "She's something." Lisa frowned. "Mark, you need to be careful. People like that don't just back down. They get worse." "I know," he said quietly. "But I can't just let her keep doing this." Stop it now. It'll never stop. The rest of the day felt tense. Even though Karen didn't come back that afternoon, Mark couldn't relax. He kept glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see her ATV come tearing through again. The fact that she had basically threatened him in front of witnesses didn't help. It was clear she wasn't going to let this go easily that night. Mark lay awake in bed, replaying the confrontation in his mind. He thought about the way she looked at him, the way her voice dripped with confidence when she said she'd been using the path for years. He realized that she truly believed she had some sort of right to his land, and people like that didn't just change their minds because someone told them no. They had to be shown boundaries in a way they couldn't ignore. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Mark had made up his mind. She thought this was a game. He was going to show her it wasn't. The next time she came through, there wouldn't just be words, there would be consequences. Mark woke up the next day with a single thought in his mind: enough was enough. The confrontation with Karen was still playing in his head like a movie he couldn't turn off. The way she had smirked, the way she had threatened him in front of others, the way she had sped off without a shred of respect. It had left a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew that talking to her again would be useless. She thrived on arguments, on getting under people's skin, and he wasn't going to give her that satisfaction anymore. If she wanted to test how serious, he would show her with actions, not words. He grabbed a notepad from his desk and began sketching ideas. His property wasn't huge, but the back section where she always cut through had no real barrier. There was a natural tree line, but nothing to physically stop someone from entering. That was going to change. By the time he finished his coffee, he had a plan. He would build a sturdy fence along the back, big enough that she couldn't just drive around it. And on top of that, he would install large private property, no trespassing signs, so there could be no excuse about. Not knowing, later that morning, he drove into town and headed straight to the hardware store. He bought heavy-duty wooden posts, strong wire mesh fencing, a bucket of nails, and a few bright yellow metal signs with bold black letters. As he loaded everything into the truck, the store clerk, a friendly man named Pete, raised an eyebrow. Building something big? Mark gave a small smile. More like building something to keep someone out. Pete nodded knowingly. Let me guess, Karen. Mark laughed in disbelief. How did you know? Everyone knows about her, Pete said, shaking his head. She's been a headache for half this county. Good luck, buddy. You're gonna need it. Back home, Mark wasted no time. Started digging holes for the fence posts, measuring each one carefully so the line would be perfectly straight. The ground was a little stubborn, and the sun was already making the work sweaty, but he kept going. Every time he felt tired, he thought of Karen's ATV roaring through his land, spraying dirt onto his porch. That was all the motivation he needed. By mid-afternoon, the first section of the fence was already taking shape. The posts stood tall and solid, the wire mesh stretched tight between them. When he hammered the private property no trespassing signs into place, he felt a wave of satisfaction. This wasn't just a fence, it was a message. For the next 2 days, Mark worked from sunrise to sunset. His hands grew sore, his back ached, but with each new section completed, he felt more in control of his own land. On the third day, as he was securing the final piece, he heard that familiar sound in the distance, the ATV. His muscles tensed. Sure enough, Karen appeared from the trail, heading straight for the spot she always used. But this time, she came to an abrupt stop. Her head tilted as she looked at the newly built fence. She sat there for a moment, engine idling like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Then she revved the throttle once, as if testing her own nerve, and drove slowly along the fence line. Looking for a gap, Mark stood a few yards away, arms crossed, saying nothing. She finally found a narrow space between 2 trees, where the fence hadn't yet been fully secured, and tried to push her ATV through, but the gap was too tight. She backed up and tried again, her tires spitting dirt. It was clear she wasn't going to make it, but that didn't stop her from trying several more times. Finally, she killed the engine and got off the ATV. You can't do this, she yelled across the yard. Mark raised an eyebrow. I already did. This is against HOA rules. she shouted, her voice full of outrage. "I'm not in your HOA," he replied evenly, "and this is my property. I can do whatever I want on it." Her face twisted in anger. "You're ruining the neighborhood? Everyone uses this path." Mark stayed calm. "No, you use this path. And you're not going to anymore." She stomped back to her ATV, muttering something under her breath. Then, in a sudden burst of childish defiance, she revved the engine loudly before speeding back toward the trail. Mark watched her go, but he knew this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't walk away quietly. The next morning proved him right. He woke to the sound of shouting. When he stepped outside, he saw Karen standing in his driveway, arms waving, her voice echoing across the yard. She was dressed in workout clothes, but her expression was anything but relaxed. "You think you can just block me out? You think this is over?" she yelled. Mark didn't even walk all the way to her. He stayed near the porch, a few steps. "1 foot on this property without my permission. I'm calling the sheriff." "Oh, please," she scoffed. "You think the sheriff's going to waste time on this? I'll tell him you're harassing me. I have friends in the HOA and we can make your life a nightmare." Mark didn't raise his voice. "Go ahead, try it." Her mouth opened as if to fire back, but instead she turned sharply, stormed to her ATV and sped off, throwing up another cloud of dust in her wake. That day, Mark took the next step in his plan: cameras. He ordered a set of motion-activated security cameras and spent the afternoon mounting them at key spots along the fence line and near the driveway. They were high-resolution, with night vision and a direct feed to his phone. If Karen decided to test him again, he would have proof. Sure. Enough. It didn't take long. 2 nights later, around dusk, his phone buzzed with a notification from the cameras. Opened the app, and there she was, caught in crystal-clear video, trying to push her TV up against the fence again. When it wouldn't budge, she got off and tried to lift part of the mesh, clearly hoping to make an opening. But when the metal creaked loudly, she froze, looked around, and then stomped back to her ATV. Muttering angrily to herself before disappearing into the trees, Mark saved. The footage, and the next morning drove straight to the county sheriff's office. He explained the situation, showed them the video, and made it clear that this was ongoing harassment. The deputy, a tall man named Harris, frowned as he watched the clip. "This is crystal clear. We'll give her a formal warning. She trespasses. Again, after that, we can press charges." Later that afternoon, Mark stood at the window as a sheriff's cruiser pulled up in front of Karen's house. He couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see her body language from across the street. First defensive, then angry, then flustered. At one point, she threw her arms in the air as if she couldn't believe what she was being told. The deputy stayed calm, handed her a piece of paper, and left. Mark didn't see her for the rest of the day. For a brief moment, he thought maybe the warning had finally sunk in. But deep down, he knew Karen's pride wouldn't let her back down that easily. People like her didn't just stop. They regrouped and came back louder. And he was right the following weekend. Karen showed up again, but this time she wasn't alone. For a few quiet days after the sheriff's visit, Mark allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the problem was over. The mornings were peaceful again, filled only with the sound of birds instead of the roar of an ATV. He could sit on his porch with his coffee without worrying about being coated in dust. He even started working on planting a new flower bed near the fence line, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't felt in weeks, but peace, he would soon learn, was only temporary when it came to Karen. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and sunny, and Mark was fixing a loose board on the porch when he heard the sound of multiple engines approaching. Not ATVs this time, cars. He looked up and saw a black SUV followed closely by a silver sedan pulling into the end of his driveway. His stomach sank when he saw Karen step out of the SUV, her arms crossed, her chin lifted high like she was walking into a courtroom. She expected to win. Behind her, 2 other people got out, a balding man in a neatly pressed shirt and a woman in a floral blouse who looked like she practiced. Frowning in the mirror, Karen wasted no time. She marched toward him with the other 2 in tow. Mark, she said in a tone that sounded polite but carried the weight of a challenge. We need to talk. Mark straightened up, setting his hammer aside. What about... The balding man spoke before Karen could. I'm Thomas, president of the HOA board. This is Linda, our vice president. We're here to discuss your obstruction. Mark blinked. My what? The fence? Linda said, her voice sharp. Karen informed us that you've blocked off an important neighborhood access point to the trail. That's against our community guidelines. Mark resisted the urge to laugh. You must be mistaken. This isn't part of your community. My property isn't in the HOA. Your guidelines don't apply here. Karen stepped forward, clearly pleased to have backup. It doesn't matter if you're in the HOA. This trail has been used by the neighborhood for years. It's about community spirit, about being a good neighbor. You've destroyed that by putting up this ridiculous fence. Mark took a slow breath, keeping his tone steady. I haven't destroyed anything. I've protected my property. And as for the trail, it's not an official access point. It's my land. You've been trespassing. Linda's frown deepened. Could have avoided all of this if you had just been willing to compromise. Mark's patience was running thin. Compromise. Wait, you mean letting Karen keep riding her ATV through my yard every day? Spraying dirt and dust all over my porch? No, thank you. Thomas stepped in, trying for a calmer approach. We don't want this to turn into a legal matter. But if you refuse to remove the fence, we may have no choice but to escalate. Mark tilted his head slightly. Escalate. Go ahead. Before you do, take a look at this. He pulled a folded document from his back pocket, a printed copy of the county property records. Here's proof that this land is privately owned by me and that it's not under HOA jurisdiction, which means you have zero authority here. Thomas hesitated, taking the paper and looking it over. His eyes moved across the page, and his confident expression started to fade. Linda peered over his shoulder, her frown turning into a scowl. Karen, however, didn't even glance at it. Please, she said, waving a hand dismissively. Paperwork doesn't mean anything. Everyone knows this is part of the neighborhood. Finally let his frustration show. Paperwork means everything when it comes to property lines. You've been ignoring that fact for weeks. This conversation is over. You and your HOA have no authority here. If you step onto this property again without my permission, I'll have you trespassed. For a moment, there was silence. Thomas and Linda looked at each other, clearly realizing they had no ground to stand on. They turned back toward their cars, muttering about misunderstandings and possible communication errors. Karen stayed put, her face red, her hands clenched at her sides. You think you've won? She snapped. You're just making enemies. Everyone in this neighborhood is going to know what kind of person you really are. Mark didn't even flinch. If respecting my own property makes me a bad neighbor in your eyes, I'm fine with that. Her lips trembled with anger. She let out a loud, frustrated yell, then spun on her heel and stomped toward her ATV, which was parked just off the driveway. She started the engine with an aggressive rev and sped off down the road, the noise fading until all that was left was the sound of the wind in the trees. After they were gone, Mark stood there for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. His heart was still pounding from the confrontation, but he also felt a strange sense of relief. It was finally clear she had no power here. She could complain, she could gossip, she could stomp her feet all she wanted, but she couldn't force him to give up his rights. Over the next few days, word did spread. Some neighbors gave him curious looks when he went into town. Others avoided eye contact entirely. But there were also a few who stopped him quietly to say they admired what he'd done. One man, a soft-spoken retiree named Bill, even told him, "You're the first person who's ever stood up to her. Good for you." Karen, however, was noticeably absent from the trail behind his house. The ATV noise was gone. No more dust clouds, no more smug waves. Mark could finally enjoy his mornings again, sipping coffee on the porch while watching the sunrise. One evening, as he was locking up the shed, he caught sight of the fence and the fading light. The no trespassing signs gleamed faintly. The metal reflecting the last rays of the sun wasn't just a fence anymore. It was a symbol of his decision to stand his ground. And from that day on, the only sound in his mornings was the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle songs of birds. For Mark, that was the sweetest victory of all.